And now we come to our fourth section on the freeholders here. What we know of Sothoryos already from the novels, and a few other comments from what my source told me about what we'll see relative to that. Well, what do we know of Sothoryos already from everything Martin has publicly released already? Well, in the words of Maester Yandel from the World of Ice and Fire, we cannot claim to know Sothoryos well. That what little we knew was from the World of Ice and Fire, and even that was just a sketch. That here is the world map. There's Westeros, Valyria, Slaver's Bay, Karth. Sothoryos is on the bottom there. Out of universe, when did we learn of all of this? Sothoryos first appeared by name in a map that came with the third novel in the year 2000. And while not as detailed as later color maps, it does depict most of the named locations we've ever heard of. Zamatar does first appear in this map from 2000 by name, in A Storm of Swords. Let me zoom in on it here. All the major locations are in there, it's just a simple map. And some 6 years later, in the fifth book, here's the updated, slightly more detailed map that came with the Dance with Dragons. Still basically all the same things, showing Zamatar in ruins at the mouth of the river delta. And really, it's been mentioned half a dozen times throughout 5 novels. And the first time Martin really described it, because it was just listed on the map, it wasn't actually talked about in the third book. First time he talked about it was in a Q&A from 2002, where he said, quote, Sothoryos is the southern continent, roughly equivalent to Africa, filled with jungles, tropical diseases, and largely unexplored to people in Westeros and Essos. Now, the first time Sothoryos was mentioned by name in the text of the main novels was a one-line mention in the fourth book in 2005, that there's apes in the jungles of Sothoryos. Then the fifth novel in 2011 had a few more stray mentions here and there, that Yazan, the slaver who bought Tyrion, is slowly wasting away from a tropical disease he caught 10 years before on a slaving raid in Sothoryos. That's also really nothing other than someone went there and got sick. The most it was really ever talked about was when the Greyjoy fleet sails past the Basilisk Isles, but avoids mainland Sothoryos. They don't even go there. Zamatar, while it has been mentioned in a map dating back to 2000, was never mentioned by name in the novels. Discounting the outer island chains like the Summer Isles, Nath, Basilisk Isles, those are separate and distinct entities in their own right. No named characters from mainland Sothoryos have ever been mentioned. No chapters have ever taken place in Sothoryos. Again, the closest it ever came was a short mention in Book 5, The Iron Suitor, when Victarion Greyjoy says, instead of going all at once, he had broken their great fleet into squadrons and sent each by a different route to Slaver's Bay. The swiftest ships he sent to sail the Corsair's Road along the northern coast of Sothoryos. The dead cities rotting on that fervid, sweltering shore were best avoided. Every seaman knew that, but in the mud and blood towns of the Basilisk Isles, teeming with escaped slaves, slavers, skinners, whores, hunters, brindled men, and worse, there were always provisions to be had for men who were not afraid to pay the iron price. That just, he had his men go along the northern coast of Sothoryos, but to veer to the Basilisks because the dead cities rotting on that coast were best avoided. That's all we know about it in the present day. From the main novels. Then in 2014, the World of Ice and Fire sourcebook came out, and it did give an entire chapter on Sothoryos titled Sothoryos, but it's short. It's much more than we ever had, not that that's saying much, and on top of that, unreliable narrator is in effect. It states Sothoryos is not known well to people from Westeros, and this is a book written by a man in Westeros, working off misinformation and rumors. So this is all that was really said about it. Men have known of the existence of the vast savage land to the south since the first of them took to the sea in ships, for only the width of the summer sea separates Sothoryos from the ancient civilizations and great cities of Essos and Westeros. That you look at a map, it's not that far south. That as far as people have been traveling west and east, they could reach it well enough by ship. The Giscari established outposts on its northern shores in the days of the Old Empire. They razed the walled city Zamatar at the mouth of the river Zamayos. The Dragon Lords captured Zamatar in the Fourth Giscari War. Yet we cannot claim to know Sothoryos well. Its interior remains a mystery to us, covered by impenetrable jungle where ancient cities full of ghosts lie in ruins beside great sluggish rivers. We do not even know the true size of Sothoryos. The Giscari who settled Zamatar believed it to be a continent as large as Westeros. Jaenara Belaris flew her dragon Terax farther south than any man or woman had ever gone before, seeking the boiling seas and steaming rivers of legend, but found only endless jungle, deserts, and mountains. She returned to the Freehold after 3 years to declare that Sothoryos was as large as Essos at least, a land without end. Other things we know about it from mention in the chapters. Feared walking lizards stalk the jungles of Sothoryos. And these are real animals, that they're not a fable or something like mermaids. Like Syrio Forel saw one in the menagerie of the Sea Lord of Braavos, and they bring back exotic animals. So this is a real creature. A reliable character said he saw one. Hear me, the ships of Braavos sail as far as the winds blow, to lands strange and wonderful, and when they return, their captains fetch queer animals to the Sea Lord's menagerie. Such animals as you have never seen. Striped horses, great spotted things with necks as long as stilts, stinging manticores, those insects that are poisonous, tigers that carry their cubs in a pouch, thylacines, and terrible walking lizards with scythes for claws. Syrio Forel has seen these things. This is in the first novel, so they're called walking lizards, sometimes tattooed lizards because they're striped. Huge crocodiles lurk beneath the surface of the Zamayos River. Basilisks, both great and small, are found in great numbers on Basilisk Point, some twice the size of lions. Most terrible of all are the Wyverns, those tyrants of the southern skies, with their great leathery wings, cruel beaks, and insatiable hunger. Close kin to dragons, Wyverns cannot breathe fire, but they exceed their cousins in ferocity and are a match for them in all other respects save size. And there are different subspecies. It says that the largest are over 30 feet long, which is still nowhere near the size of an adult dragon. The World Book also says that the really dangerous ones are actually the smaller ones who are only around the size of monkeys, because they hunt in large packs of a couple of hundred. And they sound like pterodactyls, that they have beaks instead of jaws, and they can't breathe fire. And people always point out, oh, well, technically the dragons in Song of Ice and Fire are wyverns, that in heraldry a wyvern is a dragon that has 4 limbs, that its front arms are its wings. And a dragon is like Smaug the dragon, from how Tolkien described him in the book, is that he has 6 limbs. He has 2 wings coming out of his back. And Martin said, I wanted to make my world as realistic as possible, and it didn't seem an animal like that could really fly. Really, they can't. That would be ungainly. So what are animals that do fly? Well, things that their forward limbs are their wings. Like they look like bat wings. And that made sense to me, of just, well, his dragons are trying to be at least semi-realistic of how could this thing ever generate enough lift. But in the A Song of Ice and Fire world, the difference between dragons and wyverns is that wyverns are smaller, and they're too ferocious to ever tame. They're just wild pterodactyls, basically. And there's a lot of them, to the point that there's a region of Sothoryos called Wyvern Point, and they're the terror of the skies. So there are literal dinosaurs in Sothoryos. We've got the wyverns, who are pterodactyls, and velociraptors are stalking the jungles. They run people down on their hind legs and tear them apart with their claws. But they call them walking lizards because they don't have a word for dinosaur. But you have to keep in mind, though, the Free Cities is not a single uniform location, is it? But a region. Africa isn't a country, but a diverse region containing many subregions. Similarly, Sothoryos is a region containing many unique locations, cities, and provinces. What we've just heard is a stereotype from someone in Westeros who never actually visited there. My personal interpretation or speculation is that there are basically 3 types of subregion in mainland Sothoryos. First are the coastal and river provinces, which we know were settled to some extent with city-states. They're on maps, like Zamatar, Gorosh is another one, others, which are in trade contact with the rest of the world. Then you have the deep jungles of the interior, which are somewhat explored in the present day, after Valyria's fall, but not formally settled or incorporated and filled with dangerous wildlife. And adventurers make expeditions here to get riches and slaves, and if there's slaves, logically there must be people. They don't really explain that. And then third, you have the Green Hell, as they call it, the really deep interior jungles of the far south. It explains this in the World Book. They are totally unexplored and half legendary. Like, there's the deep jungles where people at least go hunting for ivory and stuff, but, you send explorers in there to collect things. Green Hell is a place few humans have ever even seen, and people don't know if it exists for sure or not, or if the tales of it are really true. Even slavers would rarely go this deep into the continent. This is Here There Be Monsters, the edge of the map, where things fade into legend. As it says in the World Book, the deep jungles of the interior, south of the ruins at Yin, are known as the Green Hell. There, if the tales are to be trusted, are caverns full of pale white vampire bats who can drain the blood from a man in minutes. Snakes 50 feet long slither through the underbrush. Giant spotted spiders weave their webs amongst the great trees. They are said to be apes that dwarf the largest giants, so powerful they can slay elephants with a single blow. Tales of lizard men, lost cities, and eyeless cave dwellers are commonplace. But he admits, no proofs exist for any of these. They're travelers' tales and legends. So, showing on a map, people are, Sothoryos, it's a death world. Well, the deepest jungle, perhaps, but Zamatar is on the coast. Let me draw in these three zones. Yellow here is the coastal provinces. And then you've got the deep jungle where you have walking lizards and stuff, but people go in there to look for riches in the jungle and gold and spices. And then south of Yin, and in the deep, deep jungle, deep up the river, you have the Green Hell with monsters in it, true monsters. What I'm trying to say is that basically the Green Hell might be the Sothoryos equivalent of the lands beyond the wall in Westeros. All of this is relative. That it's a continent. It's not all like that, and that's one dangerous region. There are other nice regions. Like, for all we know, in Zamatar, people might say, what, Winterfell? That place filled with giants, mammoths, and dire wolves the size of horses? They might think that of Westeros. It's their version of the lands beyond the wall in the Green Hell. It doesn't mean the whole continent is like that. Well, my source only really talked about Zamatar itself. And if what we're going to see, it's a major trade hub, it's like Carthage and Constantinople, it's a melting pot with a diverse population. Also, it's a bit like Volantis in that it dominates trade at the mouth of a river that all people traveling upriver using that as a travel network into the interior would go through Zamatar. They didn't use this analogy, but in New World terms, I myself think Zamatar, from the way they described it, sounds somewhat comparable to New Orleans. This port city at the mouth of a great river system and a trade hub leading to a very diverse Creole culture. As for, strategically, what are the economic resources of Sothoryos? World Book. There are riches hidden amongst the jungles and swamps and sullen, sun-baked rivers of the south beyond a doubt. That there are a lot of riches there, that adventurers wouldn't keep going there if it wasn't worth it. It states there's gold, it's very rich in gold, there's also spices, ivory, and exotic animals, and sometimes rare hardwoods like teak. And it also keeps saying there's large numbers of slaves. They get people in slaver raids, even today, going to Slaver's Bay, though exactly what tribes or nations these slaves are taken from is unclear, that there must be normal people living there if they're taking them as slaves. But as for the economy of Zamatar and perhaps all of Sothoryos, the primary one, they told me, is it controls the major sea lanes from Yeti and the Summer Isles. Like Karth, its wealth is from the sea. As for what might the mainland produce, it is said to be very rich in gold. This is one of the major gold exporting regions. exotic animals, slaves. So I put all this together in this crude economic map of the Valyrian Freehold overlaid on the earlier one I made. You got textiles in Mir, color dye in Tyrosh, food staples in the lands of Long Summer, timber from Quohor, cheese in Pentos, and Sothoryos, silks and spices, and gold. Screenshot this if you need to. This is just me cobbling together what picture we might have what their large-scale economy is like. And given all the other stuff they told me that I can't go into specifics, from the series Bible's emphasis on respectful diversity, which was really hammered home to me, I got the strong impression that they're trying hard to avoid a savage Africa older fantasy stereotype. Not even like that, well, you can kind of see how this works as an adventure level. Not even Edgar Rice Burroughs' Africa of Tarzan, where, well, there's normal people in it, but there's still this dangerous jungle and we're having adventures in the wild. No. It's a tale of thriving and advanced civilizations, as found in medieval Africa, like Ghana and the Mali Empire of West Africa and Ethiopia. And yeah, there's like walking lizards and some dangerous wildlife there, much as there are dire wolves in Westeros, we shall see. But they were really trying to go for something modern, mature, and respectful, and not some... Even from the 70s, there are some pretty offensive fantasy stereotypes of depicting, well, this is the Africa of this fantasy world. And you may have been getting an inkling of this if you know something of history. And they didn't tell me this by name, but the feeling I got was that a major inspiration for, or influence on how they're doing this, may be Mansa Musa, the emperor of the Mali Empire. Mansa is a title, it actually means sultan. Mansa Musa was the powerful ruler of the West African Mali Empire in the early 1300s. And here's a map. And his realm included Timbuktu. He conquered it, and his realm was immensely wealthy due to gold mines, and was one of the world's main gold exporters. I mean, internationally, this is where a lot of the world's gold came from at the time. Historians generally agree that Mansa Musa was probably the individually richest human being who ever lived. Not just in his own time, but through the present. Conservative estimates are that he was worth over $400 billion in personal wealth. In contrast today, like Amazon's Jeff Bezos and Microsoft Bill Gates, they were around $100 billion. That comes in, well, in modern times, you own stock in a company, and the stock and your percentage of the company is worth something if you sold it. I'm talking, he had, in his royal vaults, Mansa Musa had $400 billion in gold, not tied up in assets or, well, my company is worth this. Private wealth, $400 billion. He was unimaginably wealthy, and this isn't a tall tale. Reasonable estimates put it in that range. And he was also a great patron of learning, universities, and religion. He really built up his empire very well. He was noted for his piety, and he went on a famous grand Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca in 1325, which this was the pilgrimage to end all pilgrimages. It consisted of 60,000 people and 80 camels, each laden with 300 pounds of gold, which, along the way, he gave out to the poor as alms on his pilgrimage. And he spent so much gold at once in Egypt, just on his own, that Egypt's currency experienced drastic inflation on a national scale. He personally spent so much gold that the value of gold changed on a national scale. And when he came back, he was sorry on his return trip, and he had to buy it all back at high interest because he wanted to help out. He didn't mean to cause an economic crisis like that. He was that wealthy. And he is this famous African king emperor, so much so that medieval European maps at some of them, this famous one, at the very southern edge of their world map, they had some vague sense of that the gold they were getting from trade caravans across the Sahara Desert was coming from some African king. And they had vague sense of that he was there, so medieval European maps there exist that depict this crowned black African emperor on his throne holding a gold nugget. They were famous for their gold. And in case the idea hasn't occurred to you already, this sounds sort of like Black Panther, this immensely wealthy African nation from its mineral wealth. And, well, yeah, the real-life Mansa Musa was a major artistic influence on Black Panther in the comics and then going into the movie of this immensely wealthy African kingdom from its mines. So I think Sothoryos, in terms of itself, might also be one of the major gold exporting regions. Now, how do we reconcile the flourishing Sothoryos and Empire of Ash with the hostile, dangerous descriptions of it given by men in Westeros in The World of Ice and Fire? Well, there are three possible explanations which may overlap with each other. Option 1 is that Zamatar is a city-state, and maybe the province of Sothoryos mostly consists of it and a few other coastal toeholds on the continent. But due to their location on major trade routes, they're fabulously rich, much like how Karth is a city-state, rich from sea lanes, but otherwise is surrounded by the Red Waste. But we knew already that Valyria did have some functional colonies in Sothoryos. Worldbook doesn't really explain that. All of these ruined cities they mention had to be functional cities at one point. So there were at least coastal cities, that much we know. Option 2, and these are not mutually exclusive, is that a large portion of Sothoryos beyond coastal enclaves like Zamatar was actually settled and not wild jungle, but Yandel just got it wrong. The World of Ice and Fire is an in-universe book written by Maester Yandel. Unreliable narrator comes into effect. That he made sweeping generalizations, and near the edges of the map often reported legends and travelers' tales. Though even he did emphasize what he reported about the Green Hell had no proof. We cannot claim to know Sothoryos well. The southern edge of the map. Similarly, when you look at the eastern edge, people took it as fact that, this is what all of Sothoryos is like, that some of these might be tall tales. When you look at the eastern edge of the map, east of Yeti, there are cities of winged men and monsters and Carcosa. And on the northern edge of the map, the polar regions of the Shivering Sea are said to have ice dragons and stuff. So this is from the fringe of their knowledge, and maybe it's just inaccurate. Option 3, and this overlaps with the others, is that, simply maybe Sothoryos was very different before the Doom of Valyria, much as Valyria itself was different. Post-Doom Valyria is a fiery hellscape, basically Mordor. Both Valyria and Zamatar post-Doom are filled with ruined cities which were once alive. So maybe after the Doom, the province in Sothoryos collapsed in the chaos of the fall of Valyria and was subsumed by the jungle over the centuries. Last, we close on remaining questions. Originally, I titled this Unanswered Questions, but I do give sort of answers to some of them. First, why is Zamatar and the rest of mainland Sothoryos in ruins in the present day? That they're listed as ruins on maps, that all these major cities that used to be on the coasts are destroyed now, that even the Ironborn fleet feels mainland Sothoryos is best avoided, filled with dead cities overgrown by jungles. They say it's dotted with ruined cities. Well, these ruins must have been functional cities at some point. What happened? For a long time, we made some assumptions based on what happened during the Doom to lands immediately around Valyria. That when you have a supervolcano explosion on that scale, it's like Yellowstone National Park going up. This shattered the Valyrian Peninsula. This was this super explosion. It made a lot of tsunamis. You think like a 2004 Indonesia tsunami, that a lot of neighboring regions were affected by that beyond Valyria itself. That this is from A Dance with Dragons. On the day the Doom came to Valyria, it was said, a wall of water 300 feet high had descended on the Isle of Cedars, that big island to the east, drowning hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children, leaving none to tell the tale but some fisher folk who had been at sea, and a handful of spearmen posted in a stout stone tower on the island's highest hill, who had seen the hills and valleys beneath them turn into a raging sea. Fair Velos, with its palaces of cedar and pink marble, had vanished in a heartbeat. On the north end of the island, the ancient brick walls and stepped pyramids of the slaver port Gozai had suffered the same fate. Now, if you look at a map, that the Isle of Cedars acted as a wave break, that these super tsunamis didn't hit Marine and didn't hit Astapor and Slaver's Bay, because just the vagaries of geography, when you look at a tsunami map of, like, Volantis also wasn't destroyed by this, of just the direction it was in. So I, and a lot of people, used to assume that Zamatar was ruined by tsunamis in the Doom of Valyria. They're relatively nearby. They're straight across this ocean. When you see a tsunami travel across an entire ocean. But I went back and checked, and the novels have never actually specified how Zamatar fell into ruin, or when. Just that it is now. So maybe it wasn't tidal waves from the Doom of Valyria. Maybe the Dragon Lords burned it 5 years before the Doom happened. Or 1 year before. Maybe they didn't burn it. Maybe it was nothing to do with politics. Maybe there was a plague. Maybe intra-faction rivalries destroyed it. Maybe it wasn't the Dragon Lords at all, but there was a civil war within the Freeholders fighting each other, or pirates, or something from somewhere else. I'm seeing that as the glass half full, that Empire of Ash is free to say, without contradicting anything, what happened to Zamatar. That we have no idea what happened to it, so if, we assumed it was tsunamis from the Doom, but if then they go, actually it got burned out a couple of years before that, that isn't contradicting anything, we assumed that. So just what exactly happened to Zamatar? That Martin didn't sketch this out fully, and I don't think the idea is clear in his mind yet before making this. Now, I'm trying to not give too much away here. There are 3 points on which I didn't just ask my source for clarification. I was going, oh, well, why Zamatar? Then they gave me an answer or a clarification, which, oh, that makes perfect sense. That there are 3 points on which I felt something really contradicted the novels, and wondered how to reconcile it. And some of these were trivial. One of them was on heraldry. And they answered them to greater or lesser degrees of satisfaction. But I'll go into that. If they didn't want to tell me the full reason, they didn't want to spoil too much, and I think they will explain it. But 3 things, let me go through them. The first point, I'm not allowed to talk about. But on researching it and mulling it over, realized it's not so much a direct contradiction as that the book canon itself was vague. That was another one of those, well, we assumed that. Like with, well, I always assumed Zamatar was destroyed in tsunamis, and I went back and checked and realized actually they never said that. That this was never specified. It was another thing that we always assumed, and I went, well, it's vague enough. I could see how you could do that. And the few other people I've shared this with in private around online book fandom pretty much felt the same way, that, well, that's something we interpreted differently, but it's ambiguous enough that you're not wrong to pull it that way. And moreover, fundamentally, a good idea is a good idea. That me and other people went, ultimately this was the better choice. That we were surprised once our surprise wore off that yeah, this is a better choice. That, fans who care about canon and keeping things accurate want to encourage. It's not like they're against creativity. It's so long as you make it fit within the rules somehow. And it's always fun when you can think of a workaround that it still works out. So I'm not going to say what it was, other than don't worry about it. It's just another one of those, well, that was ambiguous enough that I thought it was unusual, but I actually, given a choice, I would do what they're doing. So don't worry about the first point. The second point, I will tell you what it was. It was on heraldry. That when they showed me the concept art of, this is my mock-up of, they showed me a picture that looked very much like this Sphinx for the symbol of the Sphinx faction. And that I think the young dragon symbol looks like the Targaryen symbol. I only got a brief look at it. It's the same style. Either it's exactly the same or it's a one-headed dragon. I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same. But you can tell it's either the Targaryen symbol or a direct precursor to it. So, I went to a heraldry database to make another Sphinx that I'm pretty sure is the one they use, that it's in that position. And I went, oh, great, there's all this artwork. And then I went, well, there's this quote from the World of Ice and Fire in the Conquest section, which if you just got Fire and Blood, it repeats the Conquest chapter as the first chapter in Fire and Blood. So this comes pretty prominently in that, 20 pages in. That I remember this off the top of my head, that heraldic banners had long been a tradition amongst the lords of Westeros, but such had never been used by the dragon lords of Old Valyria. When Aegon's knights unfurled his great silken battle standard with a red three-headed dragon breathing fire upon a black field, the lords took it for a sign that he was now truly one of them, a worthy high king for Westeros. So I pointed out, just interrupted, but World of Ice and Fire has that quote where they say that Valyria didn't use heraldry for different houses and factions the way that Westeros did. And again, impressing me, they instantly knew what I was referring to, because apparently this had come up in conversation. The series Bible has a whole thing explaining it, apparently. That they whipped out and went, oh, well... Yeah, and they had the script Bible in front of them, too. They've read both of them. They went, there's a scene at one point in Season 1 that directly explains this. They shot me a knowing look, started half-quoting at themselves. Oh, yeah, part in World Book where they says they don't have heraldry. Well, we lampshade that in Season 1. There's a scene explicitly where you see the Targaryen symbol being invented and the Sphinx symbol being invented. But it's really not that big of a thing. The idea is that it wasn't custom for Valyrians to use heraldry for most of their history. Their history lasted thousands of years. In the Giscari Wars, they didn't use heraldry. In the Rhoynar Wars, they didn't use heraldry. But the idea is that in their final civil wars, bucking tradition, they needed banners to differentiate armies in a civil war, that they had never fought each other on that scale before. So the idea is that, at this time, it's the young dragon's faction symbol, not the personal family sigil of the Targaryens. Imagine if Earth got destroyed, and the only, among the survivors were Sasha and Malia Obama, and generations later, one of their descendants was president of Mars or something, and the family sigil of House Obama was a donkey, or descendants of the Bush family went and ruled Europa, and the House Bush's symbol was an elephant for the symbol of the Republican Party, and that people think of it then in the future as their family symbol, but it started out as a faction symbol of the faction they belonged to, and it wasn't exclusive to them, that they adopted it as a personal sigil. So this started out as the political faction sigil, and the Targaryens eventually took it exclusively. But they will explain that. So the first point was something, it's a niggling point of clarification that I actually thought was a great idea, actually, when I would prefer it. And the second one, they said that that's addressed, and I thought, As long as they address it, the lampshade things, okay, these are cool symbols. The third point, however, I didn't think to ask of at the time, but is probably the one we're going to be debating the most. How do we reconcile all of this with how the World Book said that Zamatar had already fallen into ruin when Nymeria and the 10,000 ships of the Rhoynar fled there? This was not specifically explained to me. That after the Valyrians wiped out the Rhoynar, the survivors were rallied by Princess Nymeria, the ruler of one of their cities, and they fled across the Summer Sea. From the World Book, legend tells us that Nymeria took 10,000 ships to sea, searching for a new home for her people, beyond the long reach of Valyria and its dragon lords. The fleet limped across the Summer Sea to the Basilisk Isles, where they paused to take on fresh water and provisions, only to fall afoul of the Corsair kings, pirate kings on Axe Isle, from Talon and the Howling Mountain, who put aside their own quarrels long enough to descend upon the Rhoynar with fire and sword, putting 20 ships to the torch and carrying off hundreds into slavery. Nymeria refused and took her fleet to sea once again, hoping to find refuge amongst the steaming jungles of Sothoryos. Some settled on Basilisk Point, others beside the glistening green waters of the Zamaos River, among quicksands, crocodiles, and rotting half-drowned trees. Nymeria herself remained with the ships at Zamatar, a Giscari colony abandoned for 1,000 years, whilst others made their way upriver. They stayed there more than a year, but devastated by tropical diseases and local wildlife and raids by slavers from the Basilisks, eventually Nymeria decided to abandon Sothoryos and continue west, and she stopped at Nath and the Summer Isles and finally Dorne. Now, on the other hand, consider this quote from the World of Ice and Fire in a different section on the Basilisks. That's all the Nymeria stuff at the beginning. The regional history on the Basilisks is hundreds of pages later. Gogosos is a major colony city on the Isle of Tears, which is near Zamatar. The infamy of Gogosos outlived even the Doom. During the century of blood that followed, this dark city waxed rich and powerful. Some called her the 10th free city, but her wealth was built on slaves and sorcery. Her slave markets became as notorious as those of the old Giscari cities on Slaver's Bay. But 77 years after the Doom of Valyria, it is said their stink reached even the nostrils of the gods, and a terrible plague emerged from the slave pens of Gogosos. The Red Death swept across the Isle of Tears, then the rest of the Basilisks. 9 men of every 10 died, their skin shredding like wet parchment. For a century thereafter, the Basilisks were shunned, until they were resettled by pirates. So, the World Book introduced the fact that Valyria captured several old Giscari colonies along the coast of Sothoryos. We didn't know that before. The World Book also said that Nymeria and the Rhoynar, some 600 years before the Doom, found the mainland abandoned, like at Zamatar. That we didn't know that. Everyone always thought they went straight from the Rhoyne to Dorne, not that they had this epic journey across the Summer Sea. The World Book never says why or how exactly the Valyrians left Sothoryos abandoned. It also says that the Basilisk Isles, including important port city Gogosos, were ruled by pirate kings at this time. Wait, what? Even if the Valyrians abandoned Zamatar and mainland Sothoryos, that there's monsters and dinosaurs in the jungles, it's harder to believe they'd abandon Gogosos and the Basilisks, free of most dangerous wildlife, stated to be thriving beyond the Doom itself. That, okay, why would you abandon the mainland and the Basilisks? They're ruled by pirates now? During Nymeria's time? That doesn't really match up. In the present day, the free cities find it futile to try to stamp out the pirate holds in the Basilisks, because more pop up to replace them. But that there's more than one port plunder, that port plunder gets destroyed by an anti-pirate fleet from Volantis or whatever, a new town pops up on another island, and they name that one the new port plunder. But no, Gagosos is a stationary city, a big, thriving city. Easy for dragons to find and attack, or reduce to client status at least, or a protectorate. Why would they ignore it? You wouldn't just abandon a thriving city that was thriving at the time of the Doom, and well beyond it. Ultimately, it seems the world, and discuss this in the comments, it seems the world book even contradicts itself on what happened to Gagosos and the Isles off mainland Sothoryos. And those of you paying attention to such things back me up. This isn't the first time that the world book has contradicted itself. Martin contributed essays to it in creative bursts. Then it fell to Elio and Linda to edit it all together, and because it starts with a chronological history, then jumps to a regional history, and the regional histories don't match it all the time. That this was said about the basilisks in the Sothoryos section, that Elio and Linda have pointed out how the last big essay, repeatedly pointed this out, the last big essay Martin finished for the World Book was on the history of the Iron Islands, and the Iron Islands regional history chapter contradicted many small dating points in the other chapters. It's less easy to keep track of how the histories overlap because the islands are away from the mainland. And they're still trying to sort out these inconsistencies. So for Zamatar, I think this is a minor retcon originating from George R.R. Martin itself. That Martin is human. Sometimes, in all humility, he goes, guys, I worked out a better version of this, and I retconned it. And we're not usually upset about that, because this is a giant, sprawling series, and it's something he barely mentioned, and when he actually turns his attention to it, he might write it a different way. That, for those of you reading Fire and Blood, he retconned all of the trip of Jaehaerys and Alysanne to Winterfell. That they didn't go with 6 dragons, that was a story in the main novels, that he has retconned this. And I think for the better that the version he put in is with his full attention on it as an actual narrative, as opposed to, it contradicts a stray mention you made 3 books ago. Well, he's updating it as he goes. He's one man on a massive series. So, and he's usually good about this when people point out, okay, we'll go with that other version, the work in progress. So, I hope you're not rejecting this out of hand, but in all understanding going, even World of Ice and Fire has some inconsistencies, like with the Iron Islands. And World Book introduced the idea that Nymeria went to Zamatar at the same time it was saying Gagosos was ruled by pirates, but wait, no, it was thriving at the time of the Doom, it was the 10th free city. What's going on here? Because they're in different chapters that were written out of order. So, even World of Ice and Fire is inconsistent about Zamatar, and I don't really see that big of a problem. I think it's pretty easy to retcon this so we get both Nymeria in Sothoryos and 600 years later the Freeholders. If I were in the writer's room, I'd just say, there was a plague. That if you said that about the Iron Islands or the Arbor or something, that would be a cheat of, why wasn't that king there? Why was it uninhabited? I guess there was a super plague. That wouldn't make much sense for the Arbor, but this is Sothoryos and the Basilisks. This is a region already prone to devastating tropical plagues, which left entire regions depopulated for decades. Case in point, Gagosos. Like all of the Basilisk Isles were abandoned for 100 years, then had to be repopulated from other places. So, by direct comparison, I think, similarly, we can fit in fairly well something like, Nymeria went there during that 1 century where there had been a big plague that swept through mainland Sothoryos, leaving Zamatar abandoned for 1 century, not centuries. so that's why it was empty when she got there. But also that after Nymeria left, it was eventually resettled by Valyria, just as the basilisks were eventually resettled. Like, that would work for me, because this is a plague-prone region. I mean, after all, one of the main reasons Nymeria's Rhoynar did leave is because they were getting devastated by tropical diseases. In Sothoryos, you could say it was the same plague of, oh yeah, they didn't realize they'd landed in a quarantine zone and realized they should leave. So, there are workarounds for that, and this isn't the first time that Martin has fixed up some minor point he did. And again, I think the general broad strokes, what the factions are and where geographically they're based, like, I'm pretty sure Martin either came up with or greatly encouraged the idea of something as broad as, well, the freeholders are based in Sothoryos. Something on that scale wouldn't have escaped his attention. We shall see, but this isn't the hardest thing to work around. Just what happened to the basilisks happened to them. I'm fine with this. We shall see. Next big question. Will we see the mysterious ruined city of Yen?